At the age of 74, Guy Madison, the cowboy hero of Wild Bill Hickok's escapades, disclosed a shocking fact. But beneath this stunning headline comes a far deeper story about love secrecy and persistence in a prejudice-ridden Hollywood. Join me as we flip the pages of Guy Madison's life, a guy who lived two lives, one in the spotlight and one in the darkness of his secrets. Let's start by going back in time to the 1920s. In the sun-drenched stretches of Kern County, California during the lean and unforgiving years of the Great Depression, a boy named Robert Ozell Mosley, known to the world years later as Guy Madison, grew up in a world shaped by dust, hard work, and quiet resilience. Born into modest means, Madison's early life was anything but glamorous. His family lived humbly, relying on the land and the strength of their close-knit rural community to weather one of the most difficult economic periods in American history. In those early days, life was simple, but it demanded much. Young Robert spent much of his time outdoors riding horses across golden fields, herding animals, and lending a hand with daily farm chores. There were no movie theaters nearby, no distractions of celebrity or fame, just long summer days under a vast sky and cold winter nights gathered around the warmth of a fire. From his parents, he learned the virtues of perseverance and gratitude, even when life gave little. His father, a man of quiet wisdom, often told stories of the early settlers of the unforgiving frontier and of the need to stand tall in the face of adversity. Robert would sit on the front porch listening closely, his imagination stirred by these tales of endurance and freedom. Those memories, those voices of the past, stayed with him long after the porch boards had faded with time. The rhythm of rural life, the smell of fresh earth after a rare rain, the way a horse responds to the gentlest touch, these things left an indelible mark on the boy who would one day wear cowboy hats on the silver screen. But in those formative years, Hollywood was not even a dream. Madison had a far more grounded ambition to become a farmer. He enrolled in Bakersfield College to study animal husbandry, hoping to spend his life surrounded by nature, tending the land and the livestock, perhaps raising a family of his own under that same endless California sky. But life, unpredictable as it always is, had a different path in mind. In the early 1940s, as the world plunged into war, Robert answered the call to serve his country. He joined the U.S. Navy and was stationed in the Pacific as a radio operator. It was a world away from the quiet fields of his boyhood. The war, in all its intensity, changed him. He witnessed not only the might of military power but the fragility of human life. He saw fear, courage, sacrifice, and the unbreakable bonds that formed between men facing the unknown together, serving in the Pacific Theater. Madison was often called upon to remain calm in the face of chaos, to communicate clearly during air raids or naval maneuvers, and to act as a steady presence amid uncertainty. The war demanded a deep well of strength, not the kind measured in muscle, but the kind forged in character. And it was this inner strength, this quiet resolve, that audiences would later see and feel in his acting. In 1944, during a brief naval leave in Hollywood, Robert Ozell Mosley's life took a dramatic turn that would reshape his destiny. While strolling the streets of Tinseltown, he caught the attention of Henry Wilson, a prominent and controversial talent agent who had a reputation for discovering fresh-faced leading men and molding them into icons. Wilson wasn't just known for his professional eye. He also navigated complex personal relationships with many of his clients, often blurring the line between mentorship and intimacy. Wilson saw something striking in Madison, a clean-cut, all-American charm paired with a rugged masculinity that seemed tailor-made for the silver screen. With his square jaw, piercing blue eyes, and modest, almost shy demeanor, Madison embodied a certain kind of post-war ideal. The returning soldier, brave and dependable, unpretentious and pure. In an era yearning for stability and wholesomeness after the turbulence of global conflict, Madison looked like the man every mother trusted and every young woman dreamed of. Soon after, Madison was cast in a small but visually memorable role in David O. Selznick's wartime romance Since You Went Away, 1944, appearing as a uniformed soldier who briefly flirts with Jennifer Jones's character. Though his screen time was minimal and his lines were few, the response was electric. Audiences took notice. Fan mail from across the country, particularly from young women and military families, began arriving by the thousands. Madison had struck a chord not through theatrics but through presence. Selznick, always attuned to the pulse of American sentiment, signed Madison to a contract. Hollywood, in turn, launched a new star, one not forged in acting schools but in authenticity. Yet Madison's rise wasn't without skepticism. Critics and columnists questioned his acting range, calling him wooden or overly reserved. Some dismissed him as just another pretty face being propped up by a studio machine. But what critics failed to grasp was that Madison's appeal wasn't in theatrics, it was in believability. There was a sincerity in his performances, a quietness that felt genuine. He didn't act like a star. He simply existed on screen with honesty, and for many viewers that was more powerful than polished technique. His roles in films like Till the End of Time 1946, opposite Robert Mitchum in Honeymoon 1947, while not groundbreaking, began to show his evolution, the beginning of a steady transition from cinematic curiosity to legitimate leading man. One of the most enduring relationships in Madison's career was his friendship with Rory Calhoun, another actor rising through the Hollywood ranks. Both men shared a passion for westerns, the open landscapes, the code of honor, and the iconic image of the lone cowboy. Their friendship was a source of strength, particularly for Madison, who often grappled with self-doubt. Calhoun, more naturally rebellious and confident, served as both sounding board and support system. In an industry known for manufactured alliances, their camaraderie was genuine. By the early 1950s, Madison found his defining role and his true audience in the television series The Adventures of Wild Bill Hickok. Airing from 1951 to 1958 across both TV and radio, the series turned Madison into a household name. As the straight-shooting, morally upright Marshal, Madison's portrayal of Wild Bill wasn't just about action, it was about embodying values. America held dear justice, loyalty, humility, and quiet courage. He wasn't the loudest man in the room, but he was always the one you could trust. Children idolized him. His face was printed on lunchboxes, toy sets, comic books, and cereal boxes. Parents respected the show for its wholesomeness and Madison for his grace in the role. Partnered with Andy Devine as a lovable sidekick, Jingles Madison formed one of television's most enduring cowboy duos, a pairing that added levity and warmth to the show's steady moral compass. Wild Bill Hickok wasn't just a television role, it was a cultural symbol. Madison, who had once dreamed only of tending fields and caring for animals, had become a national icon of decency and strength. And yet, beneath the fame and cowboy hats, he remained grounded in the same values that had shaped him back in Kern County: humility, hard work, and a quiet sense of purpose. But Hollywood, for all its glittering lights and triumphant premieres, also cast long shadows. Behind Guy Madison's rugged exterior and sun-kissed smile was a man navigating the turbulent emotional undercurrents of fame, private heartbreak, and an industry that demanded perfection but offered little grace. The public saw the strong, silent cowboy. Few saw the man quietly struggling behind the curtain, especially during the most delicate years of his personal life. In 1949, just as his star was rising to new heights, Madison married the hauntingly beautiful and deeply fragile actress Gail Russell. Known for her ethereal performances in films like The Uninvited and Angel and the Bad Man, Russell captivated audiences with her wide, soulful eyes and soft voice. But behind her on-screen charm was a woman gripped by severe social anxiety, a condition that in the relentless spotlight of Hollywood became crippling. She turned to alcohol to quiet the inner turmoil, a decision that would sadly define much of her adult life. Madison, with his gentle disposition and deep sense of loyalty, threw himself into the role of protector. He tried to be her safe harbor. He would walk with her through quiet parks to ease her panic, read to her when she couldn't sleep, and listen for hours when the pressure of fame became unbearable. But no amount of love could shield them from the glare of the paparazzi or the impossible demands of a studio system that often treated mental health as weakness. Their marriage, already strained by emotional instability and relentless schedules, buckled under the weight of expectation. In 1954, after 5 years of mounting strain, the couple divorced. The separation occurred just days before the press caught wind, and while the tabloids painted it as a typical Hollywood heartbreak, the truth was far more painful and human. Despite the end, Madison never spoke ill of Russell. In interviews, he refused to place blame, instead remembering her as a gifted artist burdened by an industry that offered her no compassion. His silence was not avoidance, it was respect. In time, Madison found love again, this time with actress Sheila Connelly, a vibrant redhead with a love of the outdoors and a longing for a quieter, more grounded life. They married in 1954, hoping to escape the shadows of the past. With Sheila, things seemed different, more stable, more hopeful. Together, they had 3 daughters, Bridget, Erin, and Dolly. To his children, Madison wasn't a Hollywood star, he was simply Dad. He taught them how to ride horses, shared tales from his childhood during campfires, and made time for birthday parties, even if it meant flying across countries between film shoots. He relished being a father. There were Sunday morning pancake breakfasts, camping trips to Yosemite, and quiet evenings spent stargazing on the porch. Madison had never forgotten the lessons of his own small-town upbringing, and he worked hard to pass them on to his children: humility, honesty, and a love for the land. But being a movie star, even one craving simplicity, was no easy task. The demands of film work, especially as Madison began accepting more roles in Europe during the late 1950s and early 1960s, kept him away for long stretches. While Sheila ran the household, he was often in Rome, Madrid, or Munich, riding horses for spaghetti westerns or appearing in war epics. Letters were frequent, phone calls rare, and slowly the physical distance turned into emotional distance. By 1963, their marriage quietly ended in divorce. It wasn't a scandal. There were no bitter court battles, no tabloid frenzies. Just 2 people, once deeply in love, quietly parting ways as life pulled them in separate directions. Madison never remarried after Sheila. Some say he'd grown weary of the instability love seemed to bring him. Others believed he had poured all he had into his 2 marriages and now sought peace and solitude. Still, he remained a devoted father. Even as his own spotlight began to fade, he stayed closely involved in his daughters' lives, attending graduations, horseback competitions, and holiday gatherings. He wasn't just the cowboy hero on screen anymore. He was the quiet, steady presence his daughters could always count on. He loved taking them camping, teaching them to care for horses, and sharing life lessons he'd learned. But a movie star's life was never easy. Long trips, work pressures, and growing distance eroded their relationship. After his second divorce in 1963, Guy Madison focused on maintaining a civil, respectful relationship with Sheila Connelly, not for his own peace of mind, but for the sake of their daughters Bridget, Erin, and Dolly, who remained the center of his world. Though the romantic bond between Madison and Connelly had faded, the mutual love they held for their children sustained a lifelong connection. They attended family events together, shared birthday calls, and made sure the girls never felt caught between estranged parents. Madison's steady, sincere presence as a father became one of the most defining aspects of his life after Hollywood's spotlight began to dim. During this quieter phase of his personal journey, Madison developed a profound, though unofficial, romantic bond with actress Gia Scala, a captivating woman of Italian and Irish descent. Known for her striking beauty and deeply expressive eyes, Scala had starred in films like The Guns of Navarone and The Garment Jungle. But behind her composed appearance lay a fragile soul haunted by trauma addiction and emotional instability, not unlike Madison's first wife, Gail Russell. Their connection was never formalized by marriage, yet those close to them recognized the deep emotional intimacy they shared. They were often seen walking quietly in Griffith Park or seated at quiet corners of outdoor cafes, talking for hours, not about their film careers but about hopes, childhood memories, fears they rarely voiced to others. Madison became one of the few people Scala trusted. She once told a friend, "With Guy, I feel safe to cry." When she tragically passed away in 1972, under mysterious circumstances, part of her estate was left to Madison, a gesture that said more than any public statement ever could. He never publicly spoke about her death, but those who knew him said it left a lasting shadow on his heart. Amid these hidden relationships and personal losses, another story unfolded, one not often told in full during Madison's lifetime. While working extensively in Italy during the 1960s, where he starred in numerous spaghetti westerns and war films, Madison fathered a son named Robert Madison. The child was born from a relationship with a woman in Rome, and though their romance did not endure, Madison remained actively involved in his son's life. Robert, who would grow up to become an actor himself, later spoke of the affection and guidance his father offered him, especially through long handwritten letters sent across oceans. Letters filled with gentle encouragement, reflections on the pitfalls of show business, and advice not just on acting, but on being a good man. But perhaps the most mysterious and ultimately most revelatory aspect of Guy Madison's life only came to light after his death in 1996, when a private memoir published posthumously with the blessing of his estate revealed truths that had long been buried beneath decades of studio-enforced silence. In this candid and deeply personal document, Madison confessed that throughout his life he had carried a secret. He had engaged in romantic and emotional relationships with men, some of whom were also public figures, navigating the treacherous waters of 20th century Hollywood. In an era when even a rumor of homosexuality could instantly destroy a career, Madison lived a double life, finding love in the shadows behind closed doors and whispers and stolen moments that the outside world would never see. He wrote tenderly and without shame about his relationship with Ramon Navarro, the silent film legend best known for playing Ben-Hur in 1925. Navarro, by the 1940s, was older and no longer at the peak of his fame, but he became a mentor and safe companion for the younger Madison. The two would escape to Palm Springs, away from the glare of Hollywood, where they could share laughter, quiet walks, and honest conversation. "Ramon gave me peace," Madison wrote. "When I was with him, I wasn't a poster, a contract, or a leading man. I was just me." He spoke, too, of brief but emotionally intense encounters with Tyrone Power, a fellow heartthrob of his era, and a deeply conflicted bisexual man navigating his own internal and external contradictions. Their connection was fleeting but rich in understanding two men bound by fame, public expectation, and private longing, finding comfort in each other's unspoken truths. Madison also detailed a more emotionally charged relationship with Anthony Perkins, the star of Psycho, who lived a life of deep secrecy and profound anxiety about his sexuality. Their relationship was, according to Madison, like fire under glass, fragile hot but always at risk of breaking. They found solace in one another's artistic sensibilities, late-night conversations about fear and identity, and their shared experiences of hiding from the world. And then there was Rock Hudson, perhaps the most famous closeted gay man of the golden era. Madison described their bond as complicated, beautiful, and ultimately bittersweet. They would retreat to Big Bear Lake, far from the cameras and agents, where they could hike, cook meals together, and spend quiet nights talking by the fire. "We both knew it wouldn't last," Madison wrote, "but for a time it was ours, and no one could take that from us." Madison never publicly came out in his lifetime. The risk was too great, the stakes too high. He wasn't ashamed, far from it, but he knew what the world would have done to him. The studios, the fans, even the gossip columnists would have chewed it up and spit it out. So he chose privacy not out of fear, but out of a need to protect those he loved. In his final chapters, both in life and in his memoir, Madison left behind a legacy of quiet courage, a man who bore the weight of two lives and who tried against all odds to live them both with dignity, kindness, and heart. Of course, that is not all. A relationship between Madison and the billionaire Howard Hughes, who was a strong, mysterious, and influential man, is described in the book Howard Hughes' Hell's Angel, written by Darwin Porter. Madison was also involved with Hughes. Hughes not only transported Madison throughout the United States on private jets, but also gave him clothing and a place to live. Despite the fact that this relationship was meticulously disguised, it demonstrated that Madison was more than simply a celebrity. Rather, he was a man who navigated complicated, hazardous yet significant ties. There is a possibility that Hughes, with his peculiar and authoritarian personality, provided Madison with chances that he had never imagined, but he also put him in situations that were extremely stressful. It was necessary for Madison to strike a balance between the glitter that Hughes gave and his own privacy. Despite this, he never disclosed this relationship to the general public throughout his lifetime. It was not until his book was released that the world became aware of it. This was not Madison's intention when she shared these anecdotes. His story was written with regard and compassion for the men he loved, and he wrote it with admiration. According to him, we did not date in the same sense that people conceive of dating nowadays. Everything was concealed, coded, and handled with caution, yet it was all true. Over the course of our time together, we shared laughter, hugged one another, watched the dawn rise, and fantasized about a world in which we could be ourselves. Those words, my dear friends, are not only a confession, rather they are a monument to those individuals who lived and loved during a time when their love was considered unacceptable. Through his writing, Madison was able to not only relate his own experience, but also the narrative of a generation of men who lived in secret, but yet managed to find happiness even if it was only for brief periods. Some of the minor but significant moments that helped him get through difficult years were described in his writing. These included hand-holding under tables, stolen looks on set, and hidden letters. Madison relocated to Europe, where he began appearing in spaghetti westerns and war films in Italy, since the western genre was experiencing a decline. His work was done with skill and attention, despite the fact that these films sometimes had limited budgets. Despite the fact that the language, culture, and filming were all different, he was able to adjust to the new surroundings. He discovered a freedom that Hollywood had never provided him with in Italy. He took pleasure in spending nights with his co-workers at dinner tables where they would relish classic Italian dishes and discuss many aspects of life. In addition, he continued to maintain his connection with Rory Calhoun, a dependable companion. Calhoun, who was known for his optimism and fortitude, frequently sent letters to Madison in which he shared humorous anecdotes and offered encouragement during difficult times. Madison found enormous solace in these letters which, despite their seeming simplicity, served as a constant reminder that he was never truly alone. Additionally, during his time in Italy, he became more intimate with his son Robert. Madison spent a lot of time bringing Robert to film sets where she instructed him on how to collaborate with directors, how to convey emotions on camera, and how to maintain his resilience in a demanding business. After gaining a great deal of knowledge from Madison, Robert, who had a great deal of respect for his father, went on to become an actor in Italy, continuing on his father's tradition. This father-son link was an essential component of Madison's existence, despite the fact that it was occasionally strained by some distance. He had a great deal of pride for Robert and the times they spent together, whether it was on the set or on fishing expeditions, were memories that he took great pride in. In the late 1970s, Madison decided to retire and settle down on a huge ranch in Morongo Valley, California, where he could enjoy a peaceful existence. As a hobby, he loved nature rode horses and gardened, all of which were reminiscent of his days working in cowboy films. His ranch was more than simply a place to live. It was also a place where he could get in touch with himself and think about the ups and downs of his life. While he was sitting on the porch, he would look out at the mountains and reflect on the years that had passed. He penned letters to his pals in which he related old tales and discussed the life lessons he had gained while working in Hollywood. Madison continued to be a fan favorite even though he was not in the public eye. This was especially true at vintage film festivals and Western gatherings where he would show up with a kind grin and a healthy dose of humility. In 1996, Madison was presented with the Golden Boot Award in appreciation of his important contributions to the Western genre. This award was a fitting tribute to Madison's career. The prize honored not just his ability, but also his commitment to a genre that had a significant impact on the culture of the United States. However, his health was deteriorating. As a result of his smoking, he was suffering from chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, which limited his mobility and made it difficult for him to breathe. Nevertheless, he maintained relationships with friends, colleagues, and admirers who recalled the glory days of his profession. The letters he received from admirers detailed the ways in which his roles had influenced them. These letters provided him with a great deal of solace and served as a reminder that his legacy will continue on. As he reflected about his time spent working on the set, he would smile as he read them in the nights by the light of a gentle lamp. On February 6, 1996, Guy Madison passed away quietly in Palm Springs, California, at the age of 74. He was laid to rest at Forest Lawn Cemetery in Cathedral City, among the faded legends of Hollywood's golden age, not far from the mountains he once gazed at from his ranch. His funeral wasn't grand, nor was it meant to be. It was intimate, modest, just the way he would have wanted, filled with the people who knew him not as a star, but as a man. Former actor and close friend Don Burnett delivered the eulogy. In a trembling voice, Burnett spoke not just of Madison's talent, but of his loyalty, his quiet strength, his generosity of spirit. He recalled long days on set and even longer conversations over coffee where Madison would reflect on life-love and the ever-changing tides of time. He listened, Burnett said. In a town full of people who talk too much, Guy listened. And when he spoke, it mattered. So, what do we take from Guy Madison's story? This is not just the story of a Hollywood cowboy of Wild Bill Hickok riding into the sunset. This is the story of a human being, complex and layered, a man of contradictions, private heartbreaks, and quiet courage. Madison lived through a time when being true to yourself could cost you everything. He lived in an era of studio contracts, press fabrications, and personal censorship. He smiled for the cameras, even when his heart was heavy with secrets that, had they surfaced in his prime, might have ended his career overnight. Yet, even in silence, he found love. Even in hiding, he found moments of light, brief retreats, whispered laughter, the comfort of hands held in the dark. He loved bravely, even when the world told him he wasn't allowed to. His posthumously published memoir was not a scandal. It was a revelation, a gesture of peace. A final truth spoken not for shock but for healing for himself and for the many others who had to live behind curtains too afraid to be seen fully. No matter how long we are buried, he wrote, we will eventually find the light. That line echoes long after the pages close, because Madison's story is not just his. It belongs to a generation that endured in silence, to men and women who lived with dignity behind locked doors. It belongs to anyone who has ever had to hide a part of who they are, and to those who still do. To those of you watching, especially those who lived through the 1940s and 1950s, perhaps you remember a world far less kind. Maybe you knew someone like Guy. Or maybe you were someone like him navigating your identity in shadows, longing for a world more open than the one you inherited. His life is a reminder that the human spirit can remain whole even when forced to divide itself. That love finds a way even in the most unlikely places. That even in the most controlled of images there can be an ocean of sincerity. As I dug through archives and letters, interviews, and anecdotes, what struck me most wasn't the fame or the filmography. It was his resilience, his choice to carry both the spotlight and the silence with grace. His ability to be a symbol to millions yet still remain at his core a man from Kern County who loved horses, wide skies, and the feeling of wind on his face. I picture him now, older, sitting on the porch of his ranch boots on the railing, a glass of iced tea in hand. The sun's going down the horizon, glowing gold. Maybe he's thinking about old friends, or maybe about the parts of his story that no one knew yet. And maybe, just maybe, he's smiling because even in an imperfect life, there was love. There was meaning. There was truth. Hollywood was never easy. It made stars and broke spirits. It crowned you one day and forgot you the next. But Guy Madison left something behind, not just on screen but in memory. And when he chose at last to tell the whole truth of who he was, he didn't do it for applause. He did it to honor the millions who never got the chance. He left behind more than a legacy, he left a lesson in courage, in compassion, in living honestly even when the world isn't ready. So, wherever you are, whether you remember Madison in cowboy boots or are just meeting him now, I hope his story reminds you to look a little deeper, to love more openly, and to carry the quiet heroes of the past into a more generous future. Because in the end, Guy Madison was more than a handsome face or a television icon. He was a man who dared in his own quiet way to live true to his heart. And maybe that's the most heroic thing of all. Thank you for taking the time to watch the video. If you loved this article, please like, subscribe, and share with your friends. Leave a comment below with your opinions on Guy Madison or any other Hollywood celebrity you'd want us to investigate. We'll see you in the next video. Have a great day, and keep your heart open. Goodbye.